Congrats on getting beyond $1 million. What got you here won't always get you there. This is a podcast for entrepreneurs who want to reach beyond their 7-figure business and scale to 8, 9, and even 10 figures. I'm Brad Weimert, and as the founder of EasyPay Direct, I have had the privilege to work with more than 30,000 businesses, allowing me to see the data behind what some of the most successful companies on the planet are doing differently. Join me each week as I dig in with experts in sales, marketing, operations, technology, and wealth building. And you'll learn some of the specific tools, tactics, and strategies that are working today in those multi-million, 8, 9, and 10-figure businesses. Life can get exciting beyond $1 million. Pickleball is the fastest growing game in the U.S. right now. What's the next one? Tim Swindle thinks he's got it. He has multiple 8-figure exits and has done this in the gaming space before. Crazy lessons on getting into retail, growing businesses, and doing it all with little to no team. You're going to love this episode. Tim Swindle, I appreciate you taking some time to join me and talk about business.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
For sure. So I want to talk about your current product, which is PaddleSmash, which is this crazy combination of pickleball and smash ball, kind of, sort of.
Yeah, spike ball.
Which is spike ball. Thank you. I want to get there, but before we do, I want to talk about, you've had a couple other 8-figure exits and kind of an interesting path that has both been in that space of game making and also precedes that. So can you kind of tell me about the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey?
Sure. It started kind of late relative to a lot of folks. When I was around 30 years old, I had this come to Jesus moment of, not being happy with my current situation. I was in commercial real estate. And, had always had the entrepreneurial itch since I was like 14 years old. It was my first thing. I was teaching kids how to play golf, and I set up a little golf teaching business. I had no rights to give them the quality of my game to teach kids how to play golf. But anyway, I love being my own boss. And so anyway, I got to be 30 years old. And I was like, if I'm going to do this, I got to do it now. And I hooked up with some guys that I went to school with at University of Illinois. They were just getting going on a sales software. I got involved early as one of their first investors, and then approached them about saying, hey, what if we teamed up and did this thing together? So we built that over a period of 5 years. That was venture backed. That company was called Point Drive. It was a sales software. We ultimately sold it in 2016 to LinkedIn. It was basically the idea behind it was, if you're in a sales role, you're delivering and sending a lot of content to potential clients and customers. And right now you're just kind of putting that all you're smashing that into an email. You've got attachments, PDFs, you're sending links to websites, videos maybe. What our software did was take all that content, you would upload it into our software, which created this kind of branded presentation of what you were going to be sending that came across very professional to the client. And they would receive this, and you would also get analytics to understand what they were doing with it, what they were looking at, when they were looking at it, so you could judge and base your follow-up accordingly. So that was that company, and LinkedIn was a client of ours. And so we realized quickly, and this could maybe be something we can dive into, which was starting to think about an exit. And we started to align ourselves with certain potential acquirers. One of those being LinkedIn. We saw how their salespeople were using it. We knew that they had a existing software called Sales Navigator that it could potentially fit in nicely with. And so we started to, when it comes to the product roadmap, things like that, we would develop ideas and create new features that would just kind of align ourselves with what we felt was missing from Sales Navigator. And eventually they kind of got the hint as well, and they approached us about acquiring us. And that happened. That was an 8-figure exit that happened in 2016.
Interesting. So I have a couple questions about that. The first is, you came from commercial real estate. This is software. And software development is, we have a full-time crew inside EasyPay Direct for software development. And I say this as nicely as possible. It is the bane of my existence. It is one of the most challenging things. And I'm not a completely non-technical person, but I'm not a developer. So presumably you aren't either. So what was the intro into the world of software? Why did you choose that? And why did you end up going venture backed?
Yeah, so you're right. I do not know how to code. I'm not a developer. I'm on the business side. And so, sales, the early days, it was wearing a lot of hats, but, sales, marketing operations. But teaming yourself up with somebody that does know that. So, one of the other co-founders was a software engineer and was able to build out that side of the business. So, just working with and aligning yourself with folks who have complementary skills is, something that I've certainly, done with the last few ventures I've had. To answer your other question, why venture backed? Yeah. So software engineers are expensive, as you know. And so we kind of had no choice. Once it's like a drug, and once you take it, you just need to take more of it. And so we got on that Ferris wheel or that spinning wheel of just always needed to raise capital, and it worked out in the end. But and we'll get into what I'm doing now, which is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Very low tech, non-venture backed, bootstrap type approach. So yeah, that was the type of business it was. It was venture backed. We needed a lot of capital. We had 20 plus people, high overhead, high operating costs, and we needed the money to make that happen.
Everything I've done has been bootstrap, and I find the venture approach fascinating because inevitably your day-to-day is different. Your sort of metrics that you track have to be different because you are, like you said, it's a drug. You need more money to keep going. When you started that, did other people in the group, were they coming from a venture-backed frame? Did you have an idea of kind of when you needed to hit profitability? Or how did you approach the creation of that in the beginning?
This is at a time when people only cared about top-line growth. So profitability was not something we were ever really concerned about, even through once we exited. Today, that's a very different conversation, I think, that entrepreneurs are having with their, if they're going the venture route, they have to show some way to get to profitability. We never did. I mean, certainly if it would have gone on forever, but the idea for us was, as long as we were growing top line, then profitability wasn't an issue. And it was like we'll figure it out later type of a thing. So none of us had experience building a business at the time. So it wasn't like something we were able to draw on, but just being in that space, being in the startup space, this was in downtown Chicago, which has a pretty strong ecosystem. So just talking to other folks, talking to some of the existing venture capital folks, they helped guide us in terms of what the metrics were that we should be looking at and what they're looking for. But yeah, profitability was never one of them. So we didn't worry about it.
Hilarious. Hilarious. And it sounds like it worked out. Yeah. Can you give me an idea of growth and the trajectory and kind of what the numbers and metrics were around the exit there?
Yeah. So we're 7 years ago of when we exited. So we're going to go back a little bit here. I will say we sold at like 16 times revenue. So again, it wasn't even based on EBITDA. It was based on, our revenue, which again was something that was a thing back then. We were probably growing. Yeah, it was probably 100% per year. We were doubling every year. And that was, what we were going to continue to do for the foreseeable future. I'll say what I'm not telling as part of the story was we did pivot. So it started out as a different concept. We were basically data room solutions for folks. So if you're doing a deal, you've got a ton of documents that you're getting from a portal. So we were working with financial clients to create these data rooms. And the way and that's a more common thing now. It wasn't so much back then. But the way we were solving that problem was a little different than what other folks were doing. And we saw that our clients were using it in more of like a sales, like from a sales perspective, less so of like the actual just functional purpose of being a deal room. And so we felt like that was going to be more of like a sexy or high growth opportunity to make it more of like a sales tool. And so we pivoted about 3 years in, and then, you know, it was only about 2 years in from the pivot to Point Drive to the sales software where we ultimately got acquired.
How did you identify that? How did you identify that you wanted to make a change? You said you noticed that your customers were using it for sales. Mm-hmm. Were you actively monitoring that? Were you interviewing customers? Were you looking at data patterns? What indicated that for you?
Yeah, so sales had kind of plateaued. I mean, and it was like looking at the TAM, it was like we were just like, all right, how big can this really get? And we wanted bigger, and so did our investors. And so we did. We started interviewing our customers. And that was a fascinating process, by the way. And this was one of the biggest takeaways in business that I've ever had. And what I learned is that people love to give advice. And if you go in and with the approach of saying, hey, listen, we're thinking about building this new thing, and we just want to we're going to try to design this for you, and we want to understand better how you could use something like this. Would you mind giving us an hour of your time? So we would go in. We had some like basic wireframes around some. Yes, I mean, just anecdotally, we understood how people were using it. So we knew that, and we knew that this was an opportunity that we wanted to pursue. The next steps were like, well, what are we doing? So this was this interviewing process. Well, they would sit there for an hour and describe, you know, how they would use this tool and what were the features that they were looking for. And we were like, okay, great. If we go build this, can we come back in a couple months and sell it to you? You just told us what you want. And so we did that over and over and over. And that got us our first, call it, 10 to 15 clients. And it was fantastic. It just felt non-salesy. They were just telling us they were designing the product roadmap for us. And we essentially went and built, what were the common themes that everyone was looking for. And then, went back and gave them as a thank you for providing this time, you're going to be this special initial program, and we're going to give you special pricing. But these were some bigger names that helped us just gave credibility to us as a company and allowed us to just get that ball rolling and go and land bigger and bigger clients.
Yeah, I love that approach in general. I think one of the interesting things about that approach is surface level. It flies in the face of the Henry Ford quote, which is, if I had asked people what they wanted, it would be a faster horse. And so one of the questions that I think is valuable within that frame is, how many people did you ask, and how did you determine what was going to actually be the right thing to produce for them? And of course, also, it's worth noting that it's different to listen to a small group and produce for a small group than it is to talk to all of humanity, right? Which was that Henry Ford quote ultimately. But what sample set made you feel comfortable with, yes, this is what we should develop?
I think about 10. I think we talked to about 10 different groups in markets that we knew that this product would be a good fit for. And yeah, we didn't build everything they asked for, right? And so we took kind of, like I was saying, like we took the things that were common themes through everybody. And so that was the approach. It was highly selective in who we were going after. It was a relatively small number, but high value targets. And like LinkedIn, that was one of those groups that we had interviewed, and that's a massive opportunity if we make something for them that they want to roll out to their sales team to a few thousand people, right? So, it was like that, and yeah, to beginning with, it was a fairly basic, like all software. I mean, it starts out, it was not feature rich, but it provided the basics of what they needed. And then, over the next, call it 18 months from when we launched, we kept adding on. And, but that's a tricky thing about software. And again, I've been out of it for a few years, so I'm drawing on memory a little bit, but like, you could drive yourself crazy adding features. And so you're almost more important part of your job is deciding what not to build, because you just add on so much technical debt by creating things that you get one client needs this, and then the whole team has to shift, and You know who does a really good job of avoiding that noise is Basecamp, if you're familiar with them. Their founders, Jason Fried and David Hanmeyer Hansen, talk a lot about this, and just not getting too sucked into like what one big client wants that has too much leverage with your business and your product. And so I think that those are some good things to consider if you're building software.
I think they're good things to consider if you run a business, period. One of the things that people do inside of operations is add SOPs, new tech tools, new processes, and they do it because they see an immediate need, but they fail to look at the overarching impact with all of the other systems and processes. And then it remains somewhere in the ecosystem and it creates clutter. And it's not technical debt.
But exactly. It creates processes, time, right? Because it's as new people are coming on board and they have to figure out all these comprehensive systems that are complicated. It's like what was the Steve Jobs quote? Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, or whatever. It's just keep things simple, stupid, as one of my teachers from high school used to say. Yes. And it's something I definitely adhere to today. Maybe because I am stupid. I don't know.
I do think that it's one of the most challenging things is to simplify. And I think that it's also a indication that you have the best grip on the subject matter, the topic, the problem, is if you can distill it to the simplest form where you can communicate it or show it to somebody and they just get it. Okay, so you sold to LinkedIn, got rid of software, and you decided to make a game?
Yeah. So while building the software company, I had kind of just like a creative itch, and I came up with there was a game that we had, as friends, been playing for a number of years. And taking one step back, I read an article in Inc. magazine that highlighted Cards Against Humanity and their kind of rise to fame and kind of the path that they took. And it just got me thinking. I was like, oh, there's a game that we've been playing as friends up at lake houses late at night, while we're away, that we created this kind of idea where you'd put two concepts down on cards. You'd put an accent and a phrase, and people go around with they pick an accent for the round and say one of the phrases. And it just was a stupid, funny drinking game, basically. But I was like, we've been doing it for a long time, and it was like 10 years that we've been doing this, and people have a blast with it. And I was like, I think I could take that and actually turn it into a product and bring that to market. And I just read this kind of blueprint that Cards Against Humanity had laid out for what they did. So went ahead and did that. Again, so very different from the software company, very low tech. This was literally a box of cards, no outside capital, and did that, brought it to market, did a Kickstarter, didn't like blow up on Kickstarter or anything like that, but it was the first win. And, from there was introduced to my now business partner, Scott Brown, who had created a series of retail stores called Marble the Brain stores that, were kind of toy and game stores focused on brain health. Not exactly sure how my game fit into brain health, but either way, he decided to carry that. So that was my first retailer with Scott and Marbles. And they had created a really nice brand for themselves of kind of finding cool, interesting new things. And that what I didn't realize was that the target buyer kind of paid attention to what Marbles was doing. And so we ended up getting a call from Target being, the brand. Yep. Mm-hmm. The retailer, Target. Yep. And so
I didn't know if you meant like the target market, the target buyer for the product, or the company.
Yeah,
target.
Sorry. Yeah. Target, the company. Yep. And their buyer reached out saying, hey, we would love to carry your game. My initial plan was to follow Cards Against Humanity, which shunned retailers. So I said no. And what I didn't realize was by the extreme popularity of Cards Against Humanity, they had created a void within retail for these adult party games, which really didn't exist as a genre until Cards Against Humanity. So they were desperate for games like mine. Mine was an adult party game. And Cards Against Humanity was saying no. And so they looked at mine as like, okay, well, maybe we'll make this work. So once I realized that, I'm like, okay, the direct-to-consumer approach that's worked really well for Cards Against Humanity, maybe this is, a different approach that I can take to work with retailers who are just like open arms wanting something like my game. So did an about face, kind of changed the business model and the approach to the business model. But it took me a little while to get to this. So, I mean, just giving you an idea, like did the Kickstarter, actually didn't have games in people's hands and probably until like October of 2014. Target reached out in like November, like a month later. So I'm a month into the market and I've got Target calling, and I'm now realizing this is highly unusual and not something that typically happens. And I was nervous also because you'd heard horror stories of working with large retailers where they have all kinds of, crazy clawback clauses and can bury a young brand if the game doesn't sell well. So to their credit, they were very, they listened. They listened to what the concerns were. So after I kind of repeatedly said no to them, which again, lesson learned, the best negotiating tactic, I wasn't doing it on purpose at the time, was to say no and to tell somebody that wants something really bad to say no. Because every time they would come back and be like, okay, well, you're worried about it sitting on shelves. We'll give you these like prime shelf spaces, all these terms that I didn't understand. I would be literally Googling as I'm on a call with the Target team. They'd be like, we'll give you end cap space. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And so I'm Googling end caps. They've got, all these like marketing terms and things like that. So they threw hundreds of thousands of dollars at me in terms of marketing dollars, things that other brands pay for shelf placement, etc. Before I said yes. And again, it was not out of arrogance. It was purely ignorant. And I just got very, very lucky that this buyer, who's not used to being told no, wanted it. And he and I actually become pretty good friends now through all this.
No, so why did they want it? And I want to dig into the retail side of things for a minute too, because we're living in an era where retail is, I'm not going to say retail is dying. Well, it is dying. Retail is declining radically as e-com moves up. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not a totally viable, valuable path. And that's precisely why I want to talk about it, because as it's in its decline and e-com is spiking, it's really cool for entrepreneurs to understand the nuances of retail and how it works. And it's one of the things that I was excited about with your current product, because that's part of the equation and you've got some expertise here. So why did Target want that particular game? And can you tell me some of the nuances of, you mentioned clawbacks, et cetera, that are pitfalls in retail?
Sure. So why they wanted it was kind of what I alluded to. Cards Against Humanity was a phenom. I mean, they were the biggest thing within toys and games for a number of years, like from 2010 on, early 2010s. And these retailers, they wanted in on that action. And Cards Against Humanity very boldly was telling them no, which they have since said yes. So I can only imagine how sweetened of a deal Cards Against Humanity got to finally say yes to them. But I mean, so they had all these customers coming in being like, I want this game. And they had nothing, no alternatives that they could give them. All they had was apples to apples and very family friendly game, nothing with an edge to it. And so mine, I was kind of riding their coattails, but again, like this is going back several years, there's been a flood of these games now. But at the time there was none. And so I was kind of the second, if you will. And that's what, was driving their want for bringing this game in, is that they just saw it as something they can offer as an alternative to Cards Against Humanity. Like, no, we don't have that, but we have this.
Crazy. And so you had the Kickstarter. Was there any discussion of kind of where you were in terms of sales or popularity, or were they really just looking to fill the void and saying, hey, anything that looks good, let's get it on the shelf?
That was it. I mean, we had nothing. I mean, we did 15K.
Amazing.
We did 15K on Kickstarter. I had one retail account. We had no brand awareness. I had nothing. I mean, it's still to this
Crazy.
day, it's funny. I can't even believe it when I speak it out loud, knowing now how hard it is to get into Target and what they look for. So to their credit also, though, and to the buyer specifically. So, the old school way of doing things with retailers was you'd have to go kind of like the mom and pop specialty retail route for a number of years to kind of build up sales track record and credibility. And then they would even like give you a look. And then when they give you a look, they would put you in, they've got 1,700 stores. They put you in 100 to start. They had this buyer, Mark, who was willing to take risks, and they were cool with that. And he had taken a couple other smaller ones, not so much with like the adult party game side of things, but he took kind of like unknown brands. He just felt the market was shifting. And now, by the way, the process now is with Amazon. So with Amazon, obviously you can control your own destiny. You can sell on there. You can get reviews. You can get sales. And then, if you do well on Amazon, that's a way you can tell your story to the retail accounts to try to get placement at their stores. But I didn't have that either. And so I had nothing. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I just had a buyer who had a lot of leverage within Target, and he has very good taste, and had a little bit of a track record at the time with finding kind of new things that weren't popular yet. And he was willing to put the marketing muscle behind it. And I was just the beneficiary of his balls, basically, to take a chance on something like my game. And not only that, I mean, they did full stores. So like I said before, like typically they're going to test you in like 100 or so or less even to see if it's a fit. They did full chain that next spring. So I launched in October, had to call with them in November. Then I had to go make their first order was 50,000 units. And so when you start talking about some of the clawbacks, things like that, typically the clauses in their contract say if it doesn't sell, you have to buy them back, or you have to participate in markdowns where they're going to just reduce it to their cost, or they're going to mark down 50%, et cetera. I had all of those clauses removed. That was part of the negotiation. At the time, I wasn't able to afford. I was still building. I was still an entrepreneur on the software side of things too. This was a side hustle. So they like helped participate in payment terms, like pay me up front. I mean, just crazy things that are unheard of, especially a retailer like that. And as far as it dying, yes, there's been major consolidation amongst retailers, which has given them big time leverage when dealing with brands, because there's not as much competition for them. But those brands are particularly strong because they've outlasted the others. So Target, Walmart, those namely, at least in the game space, speaking specifically, they're still very strong. And while e-com has come on the scene, they've weathered that quite well.
Walmart in particular has made a push to try to create a strong alternative to Amazon in terms of purchasing and having a marketplace and ecosystem for sellers.
Yeah. I'm familiar. They're nowhere near.
And I don't know. Well, right. Of course. Nowhere near, but they're making an effort, right?
They are. And listen, I'm not going to bet against them, but as of today,
no,
they're nowhere near.
Well, you know what's funny about those conversations to me is like anytime I'm talking to, and it's usually an entrepreneur. It's usually who I'm talking to in life, right? But as a product of just how I spend my time. But when I'm talking to somebody about things like that, and we look at market share, and we both kind of giggle at, no, they're nowhere near Amazon. It's like, yeah, poor them. They only have 11% of the market in a multi-billion-dollar organization, and it's comical to sort of, to be dismissive of it. Mm-hmm. And we sort of all are, but it's this massive, massive play regardless to even carve out a tiny bit of the market. They're playing a different game.
Right.
And I love watching it and learning from it.
Yeah, agreed. And also, I mean, there's so many stories of where, you count somebody out and it's just all of a sudden, I mean, a little different here because it's Walmart, but I was just, been reading a lot because they just had the 20th anniversary of Netflix, and where it's like they had the meeting with Blockbuster who laughed them out of the room, and then they end up beating them, a couple of years later. But this is different because, Walmart was already the incumbent or whatever. But so they are making a big push in e-commerce. They are trying to build a marketplace, an online marketplace, just like Amazon. And while it's not their right now, yes, it's something I'm paying attention to. I'm trying to get familiar with it. We plan on launching products on there because I think it will be it will be there eventually.
Yeah, I have limited understanding and exposure to it, but I have we have a client at Easy Pay Direct and a friend of mine that has a software that helps manage inventory and the e-commerce across, and the drop shipping, fulfillment, et cetera, across all of the marketplaces.
Got it.
So if you're selling on your own e-com store, Amazon, Walmart, et cetera, and there's some other ones, you have one hub to manage the whole thing.
Yep.
And there are only a couple tools that do that. But I didn't realize it was such a big deal until I started talking to him about it. So I digress. What happened? What was the crescendo of that company? Because I want to fast forward to PaddleSmash. But what was the name of that card game?
That was called Utter Nonsense. So ultimately did get in Target, got into Walmart, got in Barnes and Noble. Because once you're in Target, it just is this stamp of approval, and then the other one, their competitors, you're stealing market share from them if they don't have what they have, essentially.
Sure.
So that just becomes an easy conversation from a sales perspective. So I came out with a couple different versions of that game, and then some of the bigger players in the space started to inquire about adding on, because I'm taking shelf space from these big companies as this little indie startup. And I just felt like it was a good time. There was a lot of interest in it. The brand was hot. The game was hot. I saw there was a lot of competition coming. There was a lot, because the barrier to entry is very low for this type of a product. And so I just felt like
to print cards.
Yep. To print cards, not a lot to it. And so,
yeah, I mean, you need to have a really good idea. It has to be a very good game.
Yeah.
But the manufacturing of it is not a big deal.
It's not,
relatively speaking.
Yeah, exactly. And so, was approached by a company. They're a private equity backed toy and game company. That's a U.S.-based company. The Hasbros, the Mattels of the world. They're global companies. They want a widget that they can make 1 million times over and distribute it through their international distribution system. It's the same thing, basically. Mine was a very US centric, US humor based game that would not just translate well to other countries. So I was kind of like a tier below those, like the Hasbros of the world. But it's a company called PlayMonster, still a big toy and game company. They're based out of Wisconsin. And then I sold the company to them.
Awesome. And what was so I assume the metrics around this exit were different than the former,
correct,
which was a 16x multiple on top line. What were the metrics like on that exit?
Yeah, that was like an 8 times EBITDA. Yeah, 8 times EBITDA is what that one sold for.
Got it. And what's the general margin on a game company like that?
Massive. I mean, I was selling them for, retail $25. They were like $4 to make, maybe. I had no employees. Like I had, my sister worked with me. This was just a beautiful, beautiful business. I made them in China, would ship them over we had a distributor in Atlanta, and they would then send them out to all of the different clients and, all the different retailers. And that was the business. I had very little e-commerce. I was doing such big retail. I was on Amazon. Amazon was starting to be bigger and bigger, a piece of the pie. But I was only 3 years in when I sold it, basically. Didn't really get involved in much e-commerce, at least from like a direct to consumer standpoint, other than Amazon. Because it was a retail, completely opposite, if you recall, how I started the company, which was going to be purely direct to consumer. It ended up being a really retail play,
which was the Cards Against Humanity.
Correct.
Which was
correct. Yeah, and now they've embraced retail big time too, and they're just a omni-channel. They're everywhere still.
Right. Do you have any regrets about exiting early and leaving and not doing the D2C ever?
Zero. I'm leaving one little piece out of this where I did initially have a business partner, and there was just a little bit of hairiness with that relationship. So it was like a clean break. I ultimately owned the entire company, but I did owe him like a percentage of a royalty, which I got tired of paying him, and so I just decided to sell the company. And just it was a bad situation. It was a good friend, and it kind of went sour because of the business relationship, because of the business situation. And so it was just a good time for me to say, hey, I can take some significant chips off the table and close that chapter in my life and move on. And so for some personal reasons, decided to do it and didn't look back once. The other thing was, and this was to turn out to be accurate, was that, I felt like this adult party game was a fad. Like it felt like, one, there was just going to be so many people flooding the market, but then also it was like, how many jokes can you make with a deck of cards? And different like versions of a game can you make? And so I just felt like, this wasn't going to be something that was like an evergreen type of a game, which, I do think PaddleSmash is. That's
awesome. Well done on the transition. So
thank you.
What was the gap between, Utter Nonsense, which is the card game, and then creating PaddleSmash? How much time did you give yourself after you took some chips off the table to then dive into the next thing?
Yeah, it was about 3 years. So that was roughly 2018.
Oh, wow.
Did some like very little things, got into like venture investing, kept myself busy, did some, you're still there, sorry. Did some smaller things, like little, I did this thing with like fidget spinners with my niece, I don't know, nothing too serious. So it was about 3 years. Traveled, by the way, for about 6 months on the other side of the earth with my now wife. So it took some time to kind of enjoy it before diving back in big time like I am right now. So so the PaddleSmash. Should we jump into that?
Yes. Yeah. So tell me so first and foremost, tell me what the product is. I've got tons of questions around the product development, the retail, a bunch of things. But tell me what the product is and how you found it, how you came to be.
So the product's called PaddleSmash. It's like a love child of pickleball and spike ball. So it's played 2-on-2 with pickleball paddles and balls, and it's played down on the ground. And spike ball is kind of like a netted round surface. Ours is like more of a hexagonal hard plastic surface that has then a net that goes vertically around it. So trying to envision that for the listeners. But it's the same kind of like you're playing with a partner to basically bump, set, smash the ball back onto the court over the net, where the returning team is trying to do the same thing, bump, set, smash it back. So with this, we're riding a couple very strong tailwinds. Pickleball, it's the fastest growing sport in North America by a lot. They're just, I think 20% year over year. Spike ball has been the most popular backyard game for probably the past 10 plus years. And then outdoor games in general, backyard games are the first or second fastest growing category of all toys and games, probably largely thanks to COVID. Everybody's just kind of still desperate to get outside and play together. So there's just there's a lot of tailwinds behind, what this product is bringing. And so Scott, my business partner, he sold his company, Marvel's Brain Store, to a large publicly traded toy and game company in Canada called Spin Master. And so after I sold both of mine, we both kind of circled around, bouncing ideas off of, trying to do something together. And he's a really big pickleball player. He plays like almost every day. And so we were like, let's do something with, pickleball. We want to be different. It's like a gold rush right now trying to get involved in pickleball, but it's like, I don't know, everyone's coming out with paddles and balls and gear. And I don't know, that just seems like not very interesting and not very differentiated. It's just very crowded. And we were like, how could we just be different, basically? And so we had a brainstorming session, and we actually sketched up something that is very similar to what is now PaddleSmash. About a week later, we were introduced to a gentleman who lives in Utah near Scott. He's a structural engineer by trade. His name's Joe Bingham, and he has 7 kids. 6 of them are boys. He's a little bit older. They're a little bit older. They used to love playing spike ball. Kind of had its day. They're over that. They're now really into pickleball. Pickleball courts are 20 minutes away. They're always crowded, something I think a lot of people are experiencing that are getting into pickleball. Him being an engineer, he was like, I'm going to come up with something that we could play in the backyard. Doesn't have 40 grand to just build his own pickleball court. And so he just kind of like took these ideas and smashed them together. And he has experience with like a CNC and router machines, and basically cobbled together a rough prototype of PaddleSmash, which looks very similar to that sketch that Scott and I did a week before, which, by the way, this happens all the time, where there's just something in the ether, in the universe, where things come together. You see a lot of like trends happen, and we'll go to these trade shows. Like Scott saw this a lot because he was a buyer, or he was like a head of product for what his role was within his toy company, where like 6 inventors are bringing basically the same idea at the same time. So it's this weird thing that happens where just like something's going on, pop culture, whatever, that, you know, ideas tend to kind of all come to the surface at the same time. So anyway, he had already basically solved the puzzle for us. He had a working prototype that he'd been refining for the past year or two, playing it with family and friends, versus Scott and I having to start from scratch. So we said, all right, we'll license this from him. He didn't know, he had wanted to take it to market, didn't know how to. So we licensed the concept from him. Ultimately had to go and basically start from scratch. I mean, he had the basics down, but we had to, it was like a 50-pound behemoth thing that wasn't foldable or mass producible, et cetera. So we had to work with a engineering firm out of Bozeman, Montana, like a design engineering firm that helped us create what is now PaddleSmash. It's lightweight, cost effective, mass producible, et cetera. That took about 9 months to a year to develop that. And then ultimately, you know, produced it and brought it to the market last year in October. So October of 22 is when we actually launched PaddleSmash.
Yeah, that's crazy. How did you meet this guy?
Yeah, so it's kind of like the Mormon Brotherhood out there. I don't know. Scott's Mormon and Joe's Mormon, and I think just kind of like through the Mormon network, they were introduced. Yeah, yep. Scott's got like a neighbor, I think that's, or somebody goes to church with, that's like brother-in-law with Joe.
Bingham, 7 kids, gave us some indications here.
Yeah, right. There was a little bit of him. Utah, lives in Utah.
Yep.
So, yeah.
That's bizarre. And so how did that impact the licensing at all? I mean, did you stick with the licensing even though you functionally redesigned the product? Was there any rift there? Is it still a licensed product? What did that business relationship look like?
You know, it's funny. I mean, these licenses, so I've actually licensed ideas myself. So there's been ideas that I'll come up with, and I just don't feel like being the publisher, you know, the one taking all the risk of producing the units and putting them out there. But I know there's companies out there that would maybe be interested in a product like that. And so I've actually licensed to them and I collect royalty checks. And Scott's done the same. So there was enough with what he did that we felt like he deserved it, because we were going to be using, you know, while we could have said, hey, we just sketched this up, why are we going to take, like, I get that.
Right.
But, you know, he was a valuable source of information for us when we were designing it, redesigning it. And why did you do this? Why was this? Why is the angle this way? Why is the net this high? You know, like, there's just getting into the intricacies of how the product was working and things like that, that he had just, that knowledge base of a year of play testing it, basically increased our time to market by probably a year. It would have taken us way longer to work out the kinks. Where we just felt like, you know, that was worth it for us to just give him a license.
Yeah, I love hearing that. I think that there's people that have, I tend to find that people that have more experience in business have a pragmatic rationale for their decisions. And the opening of that narrative was we wanted to be nice. We felt like he deserved it. But it was backed by the pragmatism. And I both believe that, relationships are the driver of everything else. And also there has to be some pragmatic reason and value proposition that makes it make sense. And it sounds like you found that with him.
Absolutely. And what I was going to start saying was like, so 100% we feel like he's earned it. I mean, we found a lot of value in what he had done for us. You'd be shocked at how little people do to get a license. I mean, there's inventors that will literally like sketch something up on a piece of paper and hand it to you and be like, give me 5%. And then they get it. I mean, sometimes it depends on who they are, as like they don't have a working prototype. They just have an idea and they'll be, and I don't like those types of like, that's not like, if you're going to have something, at least have put in like the effort to try to come up with some sort of working prototype and have play tested, et cetera. But you'd just be shocked by how many inventors just have kind of a sketch on paper and they'll be like, here it is, and give me 5%. And I mean, as the market is, it's like sometimes they get it.
That's crazy. Isn't there a fear that it's just going to get stolen? I mean, I come from an ecosystem of that being a major concern.
Yeah, I know. Everybody asks that. And it's just like there's a, what's the term? Like in the toy and game industry, your reputation is everything. And it's a relatively small world. And so if that were to get out there that you screwed over an inventor, because that's where most of the innovation happens, not within companies. This is I mean, if you're looking for the poster child for the innovator's dilemma, was it Christian Claytonson? What is it? How basically like big companies, they get disrupted from beneath because like they're too stuck in bureaucracy to come up with their own innovative ideas. And so they do most of their innovation is by working with inventors. And this is particularly in the toy and game space. And so, yeah, if they were to screw an inventor over, that word would travel really quickly and then no inventors would bring them their ideas.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So you found the magical game, you iterated, and it just came to market not long ago. Right?
Yeah, it's about 7 months now. Yeah.
And very quickly, so now let's talk about the rollout to market, because very quickly you got it into Dick's, which is a big sporting good retailer. Are you doing D2C? What's the approach to rollout here? And what's the current accelerated path that you're on?
Yeah, so similar to the game, the idea was initially we're going to go D2C. Let's get our Shopify website. Let's go Amazon. Let's build up a sales history, track record, get reviews going before we would approach these retailers. While we do have experience with retail, we do not have experience with sporting good retailers. It wasn't like we could just pick up the phone and call the buyer at Dick's and get it. I mean, so as we were getting ready to launch, the way that these big companies like Dick's, like Target, they're always like a year plus out in determining what they're going to carry. And so we were just like, gosh, like we don't want to wait that long. Cause like, if we're going to wait till next year, once we get some history, then it'll be another year. We're looking at 2024 before we ever get in stores. So we just picked the two biggest. We said, let's talk to Dick's Sporting Goods and Scheels. And let's just fire off some like old school cold emails, like LinkedIn style in messaging. We did that. Shockingly, got a hold of them. They both said yes. So like it's hard for me to describe how unusual that is for companies like theirs to say yes to something that has zero sales at this point. We had not launched or been in the market yet. I think we reached out in September of last year of 22, about a month before we launched. So we were like, oh shit. That was unexpected. Dick's and the reach out was thinking, cause this is a spring summer type game. And we were coming out in the fall, which is the worst time to launch a game, an outdoor game. We figured it would be for like April, basically. Maybe they would take it into some stores for, a spring launch. Dick's was so excited about it. They escalated the timeline and said they wanted in for Christmas. And so we scrambled like crazy to get enough units. Now they did do the test stores. So like I said before, with Target going full chain, highly unusual. That never happens. This is more of like the traditional way you'll go into these bigger retailers. So Dick's is starting with 20 stores. I think they have something like 700 or 800 total. Scheels is starting with 10. I want to say they're smaller, but they do big volume. I think they have like 30 or 40 stores, but they're really big volume. So that's what we've started with, both of them. So Dick's, we launched basically December. We got them into to their 20 stores. That did really well. They've now placed additional orders for the spring. So we anticipate that will hopefully continue to grow. And they'll add us to more stores, hopefully in the coming months. Scheels, we just launched with them. They did do more of what we were expecting, which was like a spring launch. And that's going well. They just placed additional POs. So the game must be selling through okay. And then we did start on direct to consumer with Amazon and Shopify on our website. So we have those channels running, and Amazon is probably by far and away of all of them doing the best. And so we're really excited about that as a channel. That's not one that I've had, quite frankly, a ton of experience with. So we're still kind of navigating those waters. We're working with some outside consultants to help manage that business because it's such a beast of its own. But yeah, Academy Sports is probably the third largest. I mean, store wise, I think they're bigger than Scheels. They just give us a verbal that they are going to move forward, but not till next year. So yeah, it's been a pretty quick start.
From you've got this unusual path with retail. What are the things that people need to look out for in retail contracts or retail negotiations when they're trying to get into a location?
One is if the product doesn't sell well, they can mark it down, and then the money they're losing by marking it down, they could basically like charge you for that. I don't think you can get out of that. I mean, again, like that Target story I told you, like that was an anomaly. Unless you are shunning retail, like similarly, I call it like a cards against humanity. If you can go that route, which is direct to consumer first, build up just like an incredible brand where you have leverage dealing with some of these retailers, you have to be willing to say no, basically. And if there's terms in there that you're uncomfortable with, yeah, you have to be able to say no. And unless you just have, the hottest thing, I think you're going to have a hard time getting that out of there. So it's just managing your risk. Just because they're big corporations, they're still humans that work there. Like they're not out to screw you. I think that maybe could be some of the rhetoric. I hear that maybe a little more with other Walmart, quite frankly.
Right. I think everybody hears that with Walmart.
Yeah. But it has not been my experience with the retailers I've worked with. It's like those clauses are in there. Generally what it is towards like the tail end of a run, if it's not successful, but hopefully you've had a good couple of years, and then it's like maybe run its course and the last, run is going to be marked down type of a thing. But you do need to be careful of that. Like if that could put you out of business or that could ruin you, you maybe do want to say, you know what, like I'm going to hold off for now. Because what you can do is you could say no and maybe get a shot later. But you can't do is say yes, perform poorly, and get a shot later. If you get your shot and it doesn't go well, you're not going to get another chance. Like that was your shot. Generally speaking, I mean, I'm sure there's people that'll be like, no, that's bullshit. Like but I mean, generally speaking, like that's it. So, if you go too early, then and it doesn't perform well because you don't have the marketing set up, you're not prepared to help move units. There's a term in retail called sell in is not the same thing as sell through. Yeah, it's great to get that PO, but you have to sell through. And you have to know how to help do that. I mean, so we help drive sales to Dick's. Even though our margins are much less, we want to make sure that, we're selling through product at Dick's. And because the upside potential is so big. if they do roll us out full chain, that's kind of like a game over type scenario when you're an independent brand like us. So other things to look for: penalties for not having product. You get charged delays if they have shelf sitting empty. You're gonna get charged for that. So that's a big one. Those are probably the main ones. It's like not getting a product is huge, and it's gonna probably maybe you'll get like a warning, and then they're just gonna pull you if you can't keep them stocked, because you're gonna lose them as a customer. And then it's these markdowns, clearance type thing when they're gonna if they have to get rid of your product because it didn't sell, you'll likely have to participate in that.
Got it. And that's ultimately, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, but that's ultimately because the retailers are looking at sort of the value per square inch of the shelf or some such metric.
Per linear inch.
And how dialed are the retailers relative to placement? Do they know the value per linear inch on, you used the term end cap earlier, which presumably to me is the shelf space on the aisle, right? So the end of the aisles where people are walking by.
That is correct. Yeah, they do. They have it dialed down. They have their targets for what they have to hit per linear inch. So that's where packaging comes into play. How big, how tall, because you only have so much shelf space basically that you going to be given. And so these are all factors that you have to consider and be aware of that they're considering when you're creating a product. You can't have some big ass box up there because it's taking up too much space, at that particular price point, because you're not going to hit the target that they need.
How do you test for that in terms of packaging? So you've got the size thing, so you can do a little bit of math on that. But how do you test for, or can you test for, like you mentioned, you get one shot basically. How do you think about package design for things in a retail environment to put your best foot forward?
Go walk the stores, go walk the aisles, go get a feel for what other people are doing. I mean, I would say that's definitely something that I did. You start to get an idea of like, here's typical box sizes. The other thing is you also want to stand out. So with my box, it looked like a little shoe box. Like it was different. Everybody's got kind of like a 12 by 10 by 12 or 12 by 12 box. Like that's generally what everybody did in toys and games. With PaddleSmash, we've got, when you fold ours up, everything kind of folds inside. So it's typically a hexagon, and then it folds up to where it's got kind of like I'm trying to think of the shape that it's in, but like, it's kind of like three sides showing. And so it's a little funky when it sits on the shelf. And I like that. And like they called that out. And when we met with them, because it stands up on its side. So it's kind of like a billboard. But it's also not a square box. It's got some weird angles to it. And I think that kind of maybe helps catch the consumer's eye a little bit. So, you want to fit in, but also, and play by the rules. Like you couldn't come on and say, I'm going to do a 5-inch tall box that's 20 inches long. Well, they care about per linear inch, and if your game is going to sell for the same as everyone else's, you're taking up twice as much shelf space. So they're never going to say yes to that. And then you only have so much height. So you have to decide what you want to do with that height. They're not going to move the height of a shelf just for your game. You've got I forget what it is, but I think they're 12-inch height, center on center. So you've got to be less than that. So there's some parameters that you have to work within. But yeah, I think just walking the aisles and getting a feel for what competition's doing gives you a good idea of generally what you should do.
Cool. I think that's super helpful. As I said, I think that there's just tremendous value for the e-com world to hear about retail and think about the path forward with that. I don't know what answer you're going to give me to this, but do you have any, given how you got into retail, but do you have any suggestions for approaching the retail space and trying to get placement there?
People like a good story. So have a good story to tell. I think that's maybe what Scott and I did well. Our story resonates well. In our case, it's a little different because we have experience. We were able to say, entrepreneurs, we've worked with Target, Walmart, etc. So we have credibility. We're not some upstart. And don't be too pushy. Be like, hey, we would just love to send you a sample. Just start there, and highlighting. So look at it from the buyer's perspective. So one thing I'll mention is that a lot of times the buyers, they're younger. They're typically like in their 20s, probably MBAs, and they carry a lot of leverage, and they're trying to make their way up the food chain at whatever company they're working at. And so you kind of put yourself in their shoes of how can you make them look good to their bosses. And so we would help educate them on the space. So Pickleball, some of those stats I threw out to you. Hey, we have a product that's a cross between pickleball and spikeball. I know that they are killing it selling pickleball and spikeball products. So right away, you're going to establish credibility because, you're talking about products that they're familiar with, that they're making a lot of money on. And we say we're a cross between those two. We talk about the trends in the space. So helping educate this person who probably doesn't know some of those things makes them look smarter when they in turn have to pitch their bosses to give you a shot. Those are some of the things I can think of is just like, think of how you can make the buyer look good. Because they're typically younger, they're trying to move up. They don't want to take on too much risks, because they'll probably be somewhat risk averse, but they also need to stand out. So you have to get them comfortable with what you're doing. Like I said, the most common way to do that right now is you start out D2C. Amazon is a big thing. They're scouring Amazon now, looking for new products. They're looking at reviews. They're looking at star ratings. So some of the work you're doing is before you're even contacting them. It's building up a good Amazon presence, making sure that the listing's doing well, making sure you're getting reviews. Those are things that you can help encourage. And then you have a good story to tell. Hey, we've been in the market for a year. Here's some of the trends that we're riding. We have done this much in sales. We have a 4+ star rating, and check out some of our reviews on Amazon and just link them to the Amazon page so they can see for themselves what people are saying. That's kind of the approach I would take.
Super helpful, man. Well, Tim, I know you got to run, but I appreciate you carving out time. If people want to find out more about you or PaddleSmash, where do you want to send them?
PaddleSmash.com is where we're at. I'll tell a funny story. We got delisted yesterday by Amazon because some BS. So they said we're like a children's toy and that we don't have like we don't have the right paperwork, which is stupid because we're not a children's toy. So sometimes dealing with Amazon's a pain. So go to PaddleSmash because we're for sure available there. And I'm on LinkedIn, Tim Swindle. If you have any questions or want to ask me anything, you can find me there.
I love it. I love it, man. Well, I appreciate you carving out some time. I would love to play PaddleSmash. So,
yeah,
if you're sending out kits to demo and show to the world, feel free to send one to the office.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me on.
Love it. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I enjoyed doing it. I need your help. There are 3 places you can find Beyond a Million: the podcast itself, beyondamillion.com, which has some cool free resources, including a free course. And we finally launched the Beyond a Million YouTube channel. I would love it if you would go there and subscribe. And if you don't want to, you still would probably enjoy seeing the visual content. Check it out, youtube.com/@Beyond a Million.